the rise of activity in some of these hate groups have also mirrored when African Americans and others of color have been trying to assert their rise through the civil rights movement and other things. Right. Is that why you think you're seeing that? Is that why we're seeing this again now?
Yeah, I think whenever someone tries to present an argument that in order for you to be successful, I must fail, then it allows for these hate groups to grow. Whenever someone presents an argument that your unemployment is because I'm employed, it creates that same argument. So when we have situations where the administration is looking at affirmative action and possibly taking colleges to court because he thinks that Caucasian Americans are being denied entrance into college because African Americans are being given entrance into college, it starts to fuel this false narrative that because of African American and persons of color getting successful jobs, Caucasian Americans aren't employed. And this is very dangerous because what it does is presents this argument that in order for you to be successful, I have to fail.
Bill, the beginning of the situation in Charlottesville began with a demonstration to basically protest the dismantling and taking down of a Confederate statue of General Robert E. Lee. I know you've sort of evolved over that particular situation about what should happen with these Confederate emblems on public property. What are your thoughts now?
We may have hit a paradigm shift last weekend with some of this. I don't know. I'm glad to say that nothing sudden and against the law has happened in this state. We do have a process in this state. It's kind of a more difficult process than it was a few months ago, but it's a process. I don't know where we're headed. You know, one of the questions I'd like to, I thought, where does this end? I mean, if we end up, if Mr. Forrest says come down and we put him in the Tennessee State Museum, I do want us to talk a little about who else comes down and where do we start, where do we stop?
Representative Love, I know you were at the protest up there at the Capitol the other day about taking down the Forrest bust, and is that basically, I know that's the focus for right now, but does it go beyond that? There are not that many in Tennessee as compared to some of the other states, but there are statues, I believe, of both Jefferson Davis and General Lee in Memphis, and there's a lawsuit about those. Are we going to go beyond that to, say, the Franklin statue that's down there, where there are being physical threats being at least made over the internet about taking that down?
I think that the direction we're going in is good right now to have dialogue about it, and that when we talk about taking down statues and busts in the Capitol and other places, there needs to also be a conversation about what do we then put in place of them, right? There's no need just to take them down and leave a blank space there, but we need to also talk about what other persons in Tennessee history were great Tennesseans and great Americans. So I think that's the direction we kind of go in, the next step. Where do we go from here? Not just take them down, but lift up somebody else.
Let me get you both to give me some reaction about this. There was an editorial this week in the Johnson City Press, Free Press, that basically said that perhaps one thing you ought to do in order to compare and contrast what's gone on in Tennessee history was to move the bust of General Forrest down where the portrait is of the Reconstruction era governor in the state, Governor Parson Brownlow, because Parson Brownlow was almost on the other end of that in terms of how he treated former Confederates. He put them in jail, not at all unlike what the military governor, who was later President Andrew Johnson, did. Would that be good? At least make the tour more interesting. You went around the Capitol, and perhaps, and not you might keep it somewhere in the building, but compare and contrast it with what really did go on in the state in terms of the divisions that were in Tennessee during the Civil War.
I think the Civil War was such a pivotal event in Tennessee's history that the proper place to really study it would be the museum, right? To put the Forrest bust there and to have conversations where you also talk about the slave trade that went on, talk about Tennessee's agricultural development that was clearly because of African-American slaves, and have this robust conversation. Every time a group of students, every time a group of tourists comes to the museum, they get to have this conversation and really see how our history evolved to where we are now.
Bill, what are your thoughts about that Johnson City editorial?
I think that statue and that painting would beat the daylights out of each other the first night, but that would be interesting. Those two men didn't like each other.
The ghosts are still present.
I'll mention one. The other day when all this happened, I pulled out something that I'd written about last year, an unheralded hero of World War II who never said anything about this in his lifetime, a sergeant from Knoxville, who was a prisoner of war in Germany, and one night he was the senior enlisted man at this camp. One night they came to him and said, tomorrow morning all of the Jews will need to be separated. We are taking them to a separate place. He made the decision, and everyone else did, that they weren't going to do that. So the next day when the commandant said, we want all the Jews, every single person stepped forward. Commandant pulled out a handgun, held it at his head, and said, they can't all be Jews. We want the Jews. And he said, we are all Jews here. Because of that, he saved the lives of about 200 Jewish Americans who happened to be Jewish at that camp. I'd never even heard of this guy. And so there are heroes from Tennessee. General Andrews was from Nashville. Andrews Air Force Base is named for this man. We do have heroes from Tennessee. We just, for some reason, have chosen to raise up our Civil War heroes 10 times more than World War II heroes. I've never understood that. Don't get me started on Vietnam, which we really ignore. So there are a lot of heroes, and there's a lot of traits in people that we can see, but for some reason the Civil War is something we have a hard time moving past.
Nashville historian Bill Carey, along with State Representative Harold Love Jr., are our guests on Inside Politics. We're talking about the developments of the last week coming out of the Charlottesville tragedy. Back to continue our conversation after this break.